Hi there, I'm Rory, and today I'm going to show you how to build a computer from start to finish. From the component stage here, as you can see, all the way to a finished computer that's working. This is an Asus Sabertooth Z97 motherboard. It supports a wide range of features which help to improve gaming and digital creation, as well as a dark armor plate that adds dust protection and a better aesthetic. All of your components plug into this in one way or another and allows for everything to communicate with each other. This model is from the Z97 chipset range in accordance with my processor choice. This is the I/O shield. I/O stands for input and output, and the shield provides protection against dust and blocks radio frequency signals that can cause interruptions to your motherboard's inputs and outputs. This is an Intel i7-4790K 4GHz central processing unit. This is the primary component in your computer, commonly referred to as the brains of the computer. The CPU handles and runs all operations and processes that the computer is currently undertaking, such as running a game or browsing the internet. This is a Corsair RM850 fully modular power supply, which provides 850 watts of power to your components. The PSU arranges and distributes power from your mains outlet to your system. This is a Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB 7200 RPM hard disk drive. This is used for the bulk of the storage from my system. This is a Kingston HyperX Fury 120GB solid state drive. This is used for the operating system and most important applications due to its high speeds. This is 16GB of G.Skill Ripjaw's 1866MHz RAM. I have 4 DIMMs here which have 4GB each to make the 16GB total. RAM stands for Random Access Memory. RAM is used for your temporary storage of files that allow your CPU to run programs and applications more quickly and efficiently. This is the Gigabyte G1 Gaming Edition NVIDIA GTX 980 Ti 6GB graphics card. The graphics card houses the graphics processing unit, or GPU. The graphics card handles all processing and calculations of video output, leaving the CPU free to focus on other tasks. High-end cards like this one also allow for improved graphics in gaming. This is a Corsair H100 GTX all-in-one liquid cooling unit. This is a sealed unit that provides cooling for your CPU. With liquid cooling, you're able to lower the temperature of your CPU using flowing constantly cooled liquid. The liquid passes through the radiator, which will disperse the heat along the many fins across its surface, being cooled by fans. The liquid is pulled along the loop via a pump that is located within the water block at the end of the tubes. This is the Fractal Define S Mid-Tower ATX case. The case is what will house all of your components internally and will provide them with protection. This case features a large open chassis which is unhindered by a drive cage of any sort. This means that you're unable to install an optical drive such as a DVD or Blu-ray drive into your system, a practice which is becoming less common as time progresses. All storage drives are mounted out of sight in the back compartment of the case. I chose this case due to the lack of a drive cage, and the open design and large panel window that allows you to see inside your completed build, as well as the ample cable management options that it provides. Cable management is a technique that improves the aesthetic and organisation of your build, allowing things to be a lot neater. To install the CPU, first you will want to pull back the retention arm to release the retention bracket. Apply a slight amount of pressure to the arm and pull it out to the side like this, and proceed to lift the bracket up and out of the way. Make sure not to touch any of the gold contact pins below the bracket. Locate the triangular notch on the retention bracket which signifies the orientation of the CPU. Now locate the gold triangle on the CPU and align it with the notch on the bracket. This will ensure that all the connector pins make a strong contact with the processor. Gently drop the CPU into place and give it a slight wiggle, to ensure it's in place correctly. Lower the bracket down into the notch and reapply the retention arm firmly into place. This will ensure that the processor remains in place whilst it's upright in the case. For the RAM, pull back the tension clips at the end of the 4 sockets. Some motherboards have non-static clips at either side, however this one has one side of static clips and one with tension clips. Align the RAM DIMMs with the socket via the cutouts in the DIMMs that are over to one side, meaning they can only be installed one way. Slot the DIMM in at a slight angle to allow the static clips to hook in, and then firmly press down evenly on the DIMM to lock it in place. You will hear a click when it slots in correctly as the clips automatically lock into place. Orient your I/O shield the correct way up and insert it into the cutout at the back of the case. Apply pressure along all of the edges of the shield to fix it firmly to the cutout. If your I/O shield is the wrong way up, then your motherboard will not fit into place, so always double check that it is oriented the correct way before installing. Before installing your radiator, you will need to decide where will be the best place and orientation to install it within your case. Every case has different layouts and options for radiators, and you will need to ensure that your water block and tubing will reach the CPU when it's installed. I am putting mine in the front with the tubing coming from the top, and the fan cables will be passed through to the back of the case to be cable managed later. Screw the radiator in place from the corners first, tightening firmly in a cross pattern. When the 4 corners are screwed in, you can proceed to screw in the radiator at the 4 inner points for extra stability. Before installing the motherboard into the case, I will attach the support bracket to the back of the board. This bracket is what will allow the water block to fix to the CPU firmly. The bracket will also act as a method of spreading the pressure evenly across the board, preventing loss of surface contact or even structural damage to the board itself. Other forms of coolers, such as air coolers or non-mechanical coolers, can have a varied method of attachment, such as methods that can include other forms of brackets and standoffs, as well as some stock coolers that use pressure clips to fit into place securely. When the bracket is in place, I will attach the 4 double-ended standoffs hand tight. Lay the case flat and ensure that the 9 screw standoffs are installed in the pre-marked and drilled holes. Lay the motherboard into the case, aligning the I/O portion of the board with the I/O shield in the case, pressing slightly against it, followed by lowering the board into place. Fix the center screw into place first to ensure that the board remains aligned. Screw in the remaining 8 screws around the board and ensure that the board is firmly in place and not loose in any form. A magnetic tipped multi-bit screwdriver is quite handy at this stage to ensure that the screws go into the precise slots properly without falling onto the delicate parts of the board. Apply a small pea-sized drop of thermal compound onto the top of the CPU. The thermal compound acts as a contact surface to bridge the gap between the CPU and the cooler, allowing for the heat to pass through and be dispersed. Lower the water block down onto the CPU and press firmly. Make sure that the block is aligned as centre as possible to have as much of a surface area possible for the heat to travel. Screw in the 4 thumb screws until it's hand tight and assure that the water block does not move. Further tighten the thumb screws with a screwdriver to make sure that the fittings are on securely. Screw them into place in a cross pattern to make sure there is an even spread. Install the power supply into the case with the internal fan facing down. This will allow the hot air to escape through the bottom without interfering with the ambient temperature of the rest of the system. Slot the PSU into the case at the bottom and press it into place. Screw in the 4 screws around the edge of the power supply from the back of the case and ensure that your power switch and kettle plug socket are unhindered by the case. Remove the SSD drive caddy by undoing the thumb screw and lifting it up and sliding it out of the grooves. The caddy is for using on 2.5-inch drives only. SSDs are standard 2.5-inch drives. Screw in the 4 screws on the underside of the caddy into the SSD, taking into consideration what way you want your cables to plug into the drive. Mine will be plugging into the bottom for cable management purposes. Remove the HDD caddy in the same manner as with the SSD caddy, and notice the additional screw holes that are present. As this is a 3.5-inch caddy for HDDs, it can also hold a full-size hard drive or SSD depending on what you have. Screw in the 4 screws to hold the drive in place and reinstall it by slotting the caddy into the grooves and tightening the thumb screw into place. Before you begin to install the cables, ensure that you have an ample supply of cable ties and some snips to trim the excess of the ties. It is also a form of good practice to organise all your cables at this stage and begin to plan out how and where you're going to route them. First step in installing the cables is to install the smaller cables first, such as the fan cables into the motherboard from the radiator and rear of the case. Fan cables have slots for either 3 pins or 4 pin connectors, and these ports are located around the edge of the motherboard. After you have routed your fan cables, you will want to plug in the front panel cables. These are the cables that are connected to the case itself, leading to the USB 3.0 ports, the power and reset switches, the audio jacks. On almost all motherboards, mine included, these ports will be located at the bottom edge of the board. You want to plug these in sequence. For actual front panel switches, you will have 6 cables to plug in leading from one cluster. The power switch positive and negative ports, the reset switch positive and negative ports, and the HDD and power LED ports. These will have a different layout depending on the brand of motherboard, so always refer to the user manual for instruction on which header is which. Next, you will want to plug in the SATA 3 connectors into the drives and route them down towards the lower vertical grommet and push them through, plugging them into the SATA ports on the board. When these are clipped into place, pull the excess cable back through the grommet gently. You will now need to plug in all of your PSU cables and push all of them through the bottom grommet and pull them as far through as possible. Plug the SATA power cables into the drives and tuck the cables aside to be managed later. Route the 8-pin CPU marked connector up the main body of cables and along the top and poke it through the smaller grommet and plug it into the motherboard. This is what powers the CPU. Again, pull the excess cable back through. Run the large 24-pin up and slot it through the upper vertical grommet and plug it into the board. Don't be too heavy-handed when inserting this cable, as it will provide some resistance. Run the 2 6-pin connectors up the same way as the 24-pin, and push them through the grommet under the 24-pin cable, and leave them to the side for a moment. These will power the GPU when it's installed. Now that all of your cables are in place, we will begin grouping the cables and tying them together. Utilize the cable straps provided by the case to keep the bulk of the cables neat. Group the remaining strands and cable tie them together in a neat fashion. This will give you a neatly organised route of cables. It is a good idea to double check your cables at this stage and make sure you are happy with their layout. Don't be afraid to remove cables and ties and redo the process as many times until you are happy with the results. Remove the covers from the PCI slots on the case by unscrewing the thumb screws and pulling them out. Keep the thumb screws as they will be used to hold the GPU in place. Line up the card with the slot on the motherboard and evenly lower it into place until you hear the small click as the clip locks into place. Screw the 2 thumb screws into place tightly to ensure that the graphics card is secure. Insert the 2 6-pin cables that you routed earlier to the card and pull them top upwards towards the 24-pin cable, and tie them in place so they do not move. This will act as a harness for the unsupported end of the graphics card, which can droop over time due to the weight. Here we have the finished build working. I have hooked it up to a monitor and added some peripherals to test its functionality. I have a game running at a benchmark in the background to ensure that there are no issues with the performance. As you can see, the case side window shows the interior nicely, and with the cable management in place, it is a much nicer build to look at. There are many other ways you can evolve and adapt a build with more elaborate forms of design and visuals, or even more performance-oriented purposes such as full system water cooling loops. The possibilities are really endless. With all the steps I have shown you here, you should be more than capable now of building your own system. Give it a try, and thanks for watching.